So today is one of our most favorite days in the whole year. This is the disappearance of the first real saint in ISKCON, Srila Jayananda Thakur. On this day on the day before Nishringa Chaturdasi, in 1977, Jayananda left this world. So there's a very beautiful song that Prabhupada always used to sing on the disappearance days of the great Vaishnavas. So we'll ask our dear friend Arjun to sing Jayanilo Prema Dana.
Jayanilo Prema Dana Karuna
Jayanila Prema Dana Karuna Pratu
Hello Prabhu
Eno Prabhu Kota Gela Jaya Thakur. Eno Prabhu Kota Gela Jaya Thakur. Patita Pava Amura Badura Kahakavira Gole Koda Gela Gora Nadara Ega Gole Koda Gela Gora Nadara Divo Mata Anale Pasivo Oranga Gunera Nini Kota Gele Bao গেলে পাবো সব সঙ্গীরা সঙ্গে যে কইল লীলা संगना पैया कंदे नर दामोदा कंदे नर दामोदा Gori Vaishnavin ki jai, jai Nitya Leela Vishnu Sripad Divine Grace Sila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Sila Prabhupada ki, Ananda Gori Vaishnavin ki, Sadguru Swami Prabhu ki, Mama Acharya Harida Thakur ki, Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Go, Shama Kun Radha Kun, Giri Govardhan ki, Brajabhumi Vrindavan Dham ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jayananda Thakur Tirubhav Maha Mahotsav ki, Holy Disappearance Day of Jayananda Thakur ki, Jai Go Premanande, all glories to the Asamdhavadi, all glories to the Asamdhavadi, all glories to the Asamdhavadi, all glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru, Gauranga, glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. Om Vishnu Hare Krishna Hare So today we have the amazing privilege to be able to reveal something about the glories of our most wonderful godbrother, will read a letter later. Prabhupada said that I'm very proud to have such a disciple as Jayananda Prabhu. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Sapadandiyam Adadana Srinandantai Vidam Yache Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Padam Bhujo Dilisyam Janma Janmani Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhuveva Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. So I had the very great fortune to personally know Jayananda Thakur. He was the most wonderful devotee I ever met in my life. And he was an amazing person. And he very intensely affected everyone. In fact, I'll have to beg forgiveness, I may get emotional at some points because that was Jayananda. He was, even from his childhood, he was born as Jim Core in Ohio. In a very ordinary middle class American family. Nothing very special about it. But even from his young age, he was seeking after God. There was one time he was in the church and he was squirming all around, looking here and there and climbing over the pew. And his mother asked, "What are you doing?" So, "I'm looking for God." He was at the church and everybody's there to worship God, so where's God? He was looking for God, even in a 4-year-old child. Then he went to Ohio State University, got a degree in engineering, but his heart wasn't satisfied. He couldn't see himself in a 9-to-5 job, working in some office building and just having ordinary life. He said, what was the use of it? What is the purpose? He wasn't satisfied in his heart. So he took though he was very qualified, he took a simple job as a cab driver. And he later moved to San Francisco. And he was always wondering, what is the purpose of life? He couldn't figure out. Actually, he was even thinking of committing suicide. That what is the purpose of life? If there's no purpose, then what is the use of living? I also remember the same in my life. I was also thinking, if I don't understand what the purpose of life is, what is the use of this going on like this? So we just happened to see in the news some article about some Swami from India was coming to San Francisco. Because Prabhupada now had opened up a temple a couple of temples on the East Coast in New York and Boston, and now they were opening up a temple. Some devotees, Guru Das and Sham Sundar and et al., they had Jamuna, they had gotten just like following example of New York City, they got a storefront in San Francisco in Haight-Ashbury on, what is the name of that street? Haight Street. So Prabhupada took his first, they sent him tickets to come, Prabhupada took his first airplane ride. He was amazed seeing how all the houses had became very tiny. And they went up above the clouds. It was an amazing experience for Prabhupada's first plane trip. Not the last, the very beginning of long journey around the world spreading Krishna consciousness. So he saw that Prabhupada was arriving at San Francisco airport at such a time, So he was probably the only straight person there. Everyone else had long flowing hair, funny robes with moons and suns and all kinds of claws around their neck and beads and flutes and brass bells, and he's the only person with a suit and tie, and he looked completely out of place in this assembly. But as soon as he saw Prabhupada, he knew, this is my spiritual master. And Prabhupada spoke briefly in the airport and went back to the temple. So he managed to come to the temple, heard Prabhupada speak about finding the purpose of life. He said, this is what I'm looking for. So he started coming to the morning and evening programs. Especially morning program, because they were in the middle of hippie land in Haight-Ashbury. Getting up early in the morning wasn't one of the hippie principles. But he used to like to get up early in the morning and come. Sometimes he was the only one there for Prabhupada's class, and he would listen to Prabhupada. And finally he started, he got some japa beads and started chanting japa, and he would donate most of it, whatever he earned from driving the taxi, he would donate to the temple. Gradually, actually eventually he moved into the temple, still driving a taxi because nobody else had a job. Hippies, job! They were allergic to the word. So he was the only one supporting. Still driving a taxi all day, he'd still come back. He'd go to the pot washing kitchen and wash all the pots. He'd clean up the whole kitchen. Do so much service. This was Jayananda. You never saw him unengaged. He was always doing service. Even when he became temple president, it wasn't beneath him to go take the garbage out. Everything was Krishna's service. It wasn't that those who are doing the pujari work, they're doing the real puja, and who's taking out the garbage, that is a lesser service. It's all Krishna seva. Even one boy came to the temple one time, newcomer. He just walked in the temple, and Jayananda said, "Hey, want to help me? I have to go on a garbage run. Take all the garbage out to the dump." So, all right. So the boy helped Jayananda. They loaded all the trash cans into the truck. They drove it out to the dump, threw them all into the dump, and came back. And the boy thought, "My God, if the guy who takes out the garbage is so happy in this temple, I can't imagine what this Krishna consciousness is all about." Even the garbage man is so ecstatic. That was Jayananda. So eventually he stopped driving the taxi and just became full-time in the temple. And he would take out, Jayananda led the most wonderful kirtans. And he would lead the party up and down the street in San Francisco, and devotees would be dancing in ecstasy. One devotee remembers that one time Jayananda used to lead the most ecstatic Harinams up and down the street in San Francisco. And every day there was one fellow who came, and he would just yell at the devotees most obscene things and curse them, and he thought somehow his religious affiliation gave him the right to blaspheme the devotees, and he was a big pest. And one day he just got on Jayananda, and he was just calling obscenities at Jayananda and telling him he was going to hell and this and that. And Jayananda was getting a little tired of it. So they could say Jayananda was very grave. And they'd never seen such a grave look on Jayananda's face before. He's always very blissful, but this man was just getting on his nerves. So they came to the street corner, and the light was red. So then the guy took advantage that they were stopped, and he was just, pestering Jayananda like anything. Finally, Jayananda stopped and said, "Look, if you don't stop making trouble for the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya, Krishna is going to kill you." And the guy was so shocked, and he took a step backward into the street, and a bus came by and killed him. And the light changed, and the kirtan party went on. And that devotee said, we saw a tear in Jayananda's eye. Even though he was blissfully leading the kirtan, The guy just walked off, bus hit him, and that was it. So, and Jayananda, he loved prasadam. He could eat unlimited amounts of sweet rice, pakoras, samosas, gulab jamuns. He loved prasadam like anything. In fact, there's a wonderful story about him and prasadam. One time, they got an engagement in the state penitentiary near Oakland, which is on the other side of the bay from San Francisco. And so Keshava was another transcendental character in the history of Krishna consciousness, another one of those transcendental players. He and Jayananda got this idea that we'll call Danavir, who was president of Berkeley Temple, and have him make a big batch of halava for the prison preaching program. So Jayananda called up Danavir and said, we got this prison program, it's over in Oakland, so we're going to cross the bay, so we'll come and pick you up from Berkeley and take your devotees and we'll go to this program. We want you to make lots of halava and simply wonderfuls. Halava with lots and lots of butter. Because in America, instead of making the halava with ghee, we make it with butter. And butter halava has got very different taste than ghee halava. Very nice. Maybe someone should tell Gaur Bhagwan to make a butter halava today in honor of Jayananda. And make lots of simply wonderful, lots of butter and sugar. So Jayananda, Danavir, those days he was known as Mr. Enthusiasm. And he was a little bit gullible, so he took their word and he made this huge pot of halava, made these incredible simply wonderfuls. Now Jayananda had this truck that had no gas pedal. He had a little string that he tied around his toe, and that's how he worked the gas pedal, and with his other foot he would work the brake. So he had this old truck. There was no glass between the truck and the back part where all the devotees were sitting. So they drove over to Berkeley. They picked up the Berkeley devotees, loaded this big pot of halava on the truck, and trays of simply wonderfuls, and then they started toward Oakland, toward the state penitentiary. So Keshav says to Jayananda, you know, Jayananda, I bet the devotees would really be enthusiastic to distribute this prasadam if they had a taste. What do you think? And Jayananda said, I think, Keshav, that's a great idea. So he yelled, because there's no glass between the back and the cab, so he yelled in the back, he said, pass out some plates and give everybody some halava and simply wonderfuls. And pass a couple of plates up here with lots of halava on it. There's Jayananda driving on the road with this string tied around his toe for the gas pedal and eating halava and simply wonderfuls in Keshava. Boy, Keshava, that was really good halava and simplies. What do you think? He said, yeah, Danavir really knows how to make it nice. Maybe we should try a little more. What do you think? Keshava, I think that's a great idea. He said, pass out some more to everyone. And they're going down the road and everybody's eating simplies and halava. He says, pass out a little more. That was really great. And all of a sudden Danavir looked and it was just crumbs in the pot. And just, simply wonders, you roll them in the powdered sugar, so the little powdered sugar crumbles, stick on around it, but they break off. So the tray was just filled with powdered sugar crumbles. And Danavir said, oh my God, that prasadam that was for the fallen conditioned souls, we've eaten it all. We're so fallen. We're so fallen. We ate all the prasadam for the fallen conditioned souls. Now what are we going to do? Just then they drove up to the penitentiary. And the guard opened the back of the truck. He says, no food in here, huh? Because there's no food allowed in the penitentiary. Oh no, sir, there's no food in this truck. That was Jayananda. In fact, Jayananda loved prasadam so much, usually when you're sick, you're supposed to fast, right? Jayananda used to eat more so the germs will get benefit. And Jayananda, eventually, because he knew about cars, he would take care of all the temple cars. This is the most amazing thing about Jayananda. You would come to the temple and he would be underneath a car completely covered with black grease, not what you thought of as a pure devotee. As I remember in LA I have one Godbrother named Jai Rishi, and he kept hearing in Los Angeles, there's a pure devotee in San Francisco named Jayananda. Always you hear these stories about Jayananda. So he had this idea, Jayananda, he's in this perfectly saffron dhoti, perfectly pressed and clean and neat, completely shaved head, and chanting his beads and looking off into the space, seeing Radha and Krishna everywhere, walking along, floating on a cloud. This was his vision of Jayananda. And he came to San Francisco, the old Valencia Street temple, and he walked up and somebody, two long legs, Jayananda was huge. He was over 6 feet tall and very well, strongly built, so he's huge. These two long legs with his pants completely covered with axle grease and all kinds of gunk from working under the car. With Jayananda, so it's all Krishna's service. It's all transcendental. So whoever was on the car heard him walk up and said, "Can you hand me that wrench over there?" So he handed the wrench under the car and he said, "Oh, thanks a lot. That was very nice of you, Prabhu." And then Jayananda finished what he was doing and rolled out. So, "Hare Krishna, Prabhu, what is your name?" He said, "I'm Jai Rishi from Los Angeles." "Hare Krishna, Jai Rishi, I'm Jayananda." Jai Rishi was shocked. He had this other idea, but this is pure devotee. He's ready to do any service, even go underneath the car, underneath the truck, and work with the grease and everything. And many devotees had this experience of Jayananda. The first time they met him, he was covered with grease. And he always had tattered cloth. Jayananda was so humble, he would never use anything for himself. He always, even when he was driving the cab, then he would give all the money to Prabhupada. Eventually, he got an inheritance of $5,000. That's a lot of money in those days. This is 1968 or so. So he gave $5,000 to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada writes, we'll read the letter, "You were the first person to give me a substantial donation." So he gave everything to Prabhupada. And he never wanted to spend anything on himself. And his clothes were just getting tattered and more tattered. They weren't even clothes, they were just holes sewed together with threads. So finally the devotees were embarrassed seeing Jayananda walking around like this. So finally they said, "Jayananda, it's embarrassing. You got to go get some cloth." So finally Jayananda relented. So he went down in America, there's an organization called Salvation Army. And people give their old clothes to them, they fix them up and they sell them for, super cheap prices and use the money to serve the drunks and bums and poor people. So Jayananda went down to the Salvation Army and he found some nice pants that actually fit him, because he was hard to fit. He was a huge guy. And those pants were hard to fit him. But he found some pants that fit. They were 50 cents. And there was a nice shirt that was 25 cents. So he's going to spend 75 cents of temple money on himself. And although Jayananda, he was so honest, you couldn't find a dishonest bone in Jayananda's body. But still, he was just thinking, how can I use Prabhupada's money for myself? He just couldn't do it. So, when you go to the clothing store, there's a room where you try the things on, you pull the curtain, and you try the things on, you look in the mirror, and check it all out. So he went in the dressing room, closed the curtain, he put on the new clothes, then he pulled his old clothes over top. Now his old clothes was nothing but holes sewed together with thread. Jai Sisi Gornitai Sisi Krishna Balam Sisi Radha Shamsan. So it was a very bad idea. Everybody could see what he was doing. So he tried to walk out of the store, and immediately the security guard grabbed him and they arrested him. Then he had to go to court. And he got to court, and the judge said, "So, guilty or not guilty?" He said, well, before I plead, can I say something? He said, yes. Well, you see, Judge, I work for a religious organization. Everything we do is for God. And all the money I have is for God. And, I know I shouldn't have done it, but it was God's money. I was thinking, how could I waste God's money? I just couldn't waste this money on myself, and he started crying, the judge started crying, the policeman was crying, policeman, look, I'll pay for it. And judge said, case dismissed. That was Jayananda. And Bhaktisiddhanta, who made the nice artwork in the Samadhi, our godbrother, he tells a wonderful story. He was in Delhi one time. As we told, he went to Ohio State University. So somehow, Bhaktisiddhanta was sitting with some Sikh fellow, and he told how he'd been a foreign exchange student. He'd gone to America, and somebody had come to India, and they studied like that. This was old. And he said, yeah, where'd you go to university? Oh, I went to Ohio State. He said, I have a good friend who went to Ohio State. And they started talking, and he was talking about his friend, how his friend was completely devoted to God and this and that. He said, well, that sounds very roommate. And so Bhakti said, what was your roommate's name? Jim Kaur. He said, the same person. Just by chance he met this people who was so impressed. He never partied, he never was with girls, he was never drinking, he was very clean cut, And he said, what was his name? His name was Jim Kaur. He said, that's my godbrother, Jayananda. So even in the college he was such a nice devotee, a nice person. So eventually what happened was Malati went into there was an import store called Cost Plus. In other words, all you paid was the cost of the thing plus some so-called tiny markup. And it's not in the Leela Mrit, but it says she bought them. Actually, she did the 5-finger discount, if you know 5-finger discount. She just she saw these little basket of funny, colorful figures from India. The devotee, we didn't know anything. It was from India, it was far out, so so she just grabbed one out of the basket and stuck it in her pocket and went back to the temple. And then all the devotees were looking at it. They said, you should go show it to Prabhupada. And she went upstairs, she pulled this little thing, and Prabhupada immediately got down and paid his obeisances, and they were all shocked. He said, now Lord Jagannath has come. And then Prabhupada was telling, this is Lord Jagannath, and how she told the story how Jagannath came to be. He said, were there other figures? Oh yes, Swamiji, other figures were there. Can you get them too? So she went back and got Baladev and Subhadra, same way. So then Shamsundar was a carpenter, so then Prabhupada asked him to make big forms like this. So Shamsundar made big forms, so they got Lord Jagannath. And then Prabhupada started talking about this Rath Yatra festival. And Jayananda, he only knew Prabhupada's service and nothing else. So he thought, let me make a Rath cart of some sort. So first Rath Yatra was very crude. They just had a little flatbed truck, and he had on the back, Balaram Lord Jagannath was facing one way, Jagannath was facing another way, Subhadra was facing back, 3 different directions like that, and a little canopy over. They had the first Rath Yatra in the Western world, all by Jayananda's efforts. So then every year it got bigger and bigger. Eventually they started making huge Rath. And everybody who knew Jayananda knew somehow the last few days before Rath Yatra, nobody saw Jayananda sleep. He was just working and working and working. Same Jai Rishi told, he got put on the crew with Jayananda. And they were working all day till about 11 o'clock at night. 11 o'clock at night they had this big halava feast. Then he knew Jayananda was going to get him in the morning, but he just wanted to sleep. So he went inside the closet and shut the door, went to sleep in the closet. 7 o'clock in the morning, he felt this broad hand on his shoulder. He said, Jai, Jai Rishi, it was time to do some service. Even Jayananda figured out he was in the closet. And he just worked day and night, day and night. One time they were working on the Rath cart, and Jayananda was expert to engage anybody. He would just, drunks would come by, somehow he engaged them in the Rath cart, hippies would come. So one hippie-looking boy came up one day, and he said, "Hey, you know how to hammer?" So, well, a little bit. So I need you to hold this nail for me while I hit it, So then I hit it right straight on the head. So he hit it, So I want you to hold it very straight. So then Jayananda hit the nail. He said, "Now you try it." He said, "I'll hold it straight for you. Try it." He said, "Wow, you sure you're not a carpenter or something? You did that really. You're really expert." He said, "Well, no, I never done this before. Try it again." So Jayananda held the nail, and this big tall boy, he hit the nail. He said, "Wow, that was really great. You must be an expert." He said, "Wow, I never done it." No, And actually, I need this whole line. You got to nail this down, And then he was all day long. He just came by to see what was going on, and all day long he was there hammering away, And eventually became a devotee. You know who that was? Jayavataka Maharaj. Jayananda was his touchstone. He made so many people devotees. And he always carried, as we talked about in prasadam, he always carried prasadam with him. Wherever he went. And I think Sridhar Swami in Bombay, he learned this trick also, always have prasadam, because especially so many beggars, the beggars, they learned Sridhar Swami's car, they would come up and asking for money, say, "Mahaprasad, Mahaprasad." So he used, because those days the temples were very poor, we had no money. So somehow he used to get things either for free or just hardly any cost. Especially you go down to the produce market. It was run by all these Italian mafia guys, or heavy duty guys, but somehow he touched their hearts. That was Jayananda, he could touch your heart. And they would give things for free. Sometimes the bananas got little black spots on them. They're still perfectly ripe and ready to eat, but the stores won't buy them because they want to keep it for a few days. So yeah, take it all, huge, 20 kilo cartons of bananas. He would get 10 or 20 of them. He'd get stuff free. And he always gave them prasad. And he told him his name was Jayananda. Jayananda. So we get all these incredible donations, or very cheaply. And he touched their hearts. Later, after Jayananda left, he'd go to the people who would go to the vegetable market to do the same thing. And they'd all ask, "Where's Jayananda?" And they would all be completely shocked when they heard that Jayananda had left this world. He had so much, these are tough, mafia guys, Italian mafia guys, don't care for anybody, but Jayananda touched their hearts. Another way example of Jayananda touching the heart, because he used to bake cakes and pies and when he go get the permits for the Rath Yatra and everything like that. So, and everybody knew him. So after he left, one devotee went, and there was one lady. Now she was the chief person in that department. Now this is in the early 70s when women's liberation was just getting off. For a woman to be the head person in the department was a big thing. I mean, she was a tough woman, because it was really, those days was really a man's world. And to get to the top was really, you had to be a tough woman. It wasn't like nowadays that, we almost had a woman president a couple of years ago. Not like that. So she must have been a tough woman, and the guy went, and now she was the one who had to give before she'd been in other departments just, passing it, but she was at the end of the line where the final permission came, and the devotee came with a permit, and she looked at him and said, "Where's Jayananda?" Jayananda always used to come. I worked in the lower departments. Well, Jayananda, he's passed on. Now this was a tough lady who made it to the top. And she broke down in front of unknown person. She started sobbing. just sobbing uncontrollably. That's how Jayananda was. That was Jayananda. And I told about how Jayananda was so honest, but he had this transcendental thievery in him. One devotee told me how Jayananda said, "Come, we got to collect materials for the Rath," because they're on this, thin budget. So they were driving around San Francisco all day. He saw a pile of wood there. He saw some, wire over there, some rods over there, some iron over there, but they never picked up anything. Then in the nighttime, Jayananda woke him up and said, "Come on, we got to go collect the things we found yesterday." They go around at night and just pick up the things off the street. He was so, even one nickel he wouldn't waste. But he had this transcendental, because it all belonged to Krishna. Even in New York, one devotee told how they would drive around and Jayananda would pick up things off the street, and then they happened to be on a huge lot next to the Conrail warehouses where all the trains were kept, and they had their warehouses and go downs there. It's interesting how we got that, because we needed a flat space to build the carts, and there's everything in New York is built up. It's 80 stories high. So they went to Conrail and asked about that, if they could rent that piece of property. They said, "We just sold it." But you'll have to ask the owner. So they went to the owner, and the owner had been to the temple one time. He said, "Sure, you guys can use it." That owner was Donald R. Trump. Somehow he did some service for Lord Jagannath. So anyway, they got this place. So there was all these cars there loaded with wood planks. So in the evening, Jayananda took this devotee, and they went there and they just load up all the wood planks from the cars into their truck, and they go back and load up some more. This was Jayananda. So eventually Rath Yatra became a big, huge event in San Francisco. So then finally, Jayananda got the idea, why just San Francisco? We should do this in New York. We should go down Fifth Avenue. Now in the material world, Fifth Avenue is the place. As far as we're concerned, Kunj Gully is the place. But for the material world, Fifth Avenue is the place. So if Prabhupada could go down Fifth Avenue, from starting as a little child at Mahatma Gandhi Road with a little tiny cart to go down Fifth Avenue, this would be great. So somehow Jayananda went there to New York and started preaching about having this Rath Yatra. Somehow he convinced the devotees. He managed to get all the permits. Not easy to get permits in New York, but he got all the permits, and they got Prabhupada promised to come. And he made these big carts, and they were on that lot, and because the Ratha carts were big, and in Rath Yatra in Puri they got this grand road, so it's completely free of all obstructions. But we don't have the same influence in foreign countries, so with always wires and so many things in the way. So Jayananda had made this contraption how to make the Rath go up and down and up and down. You don't have to bother about that in Puri, but in the West we have to worry about these things. So he made a little crank system that would crank it up and crank it down. He was very intelligent. So one night, it was night before Rath Yatra, they were trying it out, and he cranked it up, and they put the canopy and everything, and across the street there was this old couple who lived in an apartment building across the street. And every day they would stand on their balcony and watch the boys working and watch this Rath cart come outside their apartment. So they were standing there that night. Suddenly, huge wind came out of nowhere, and the pole that held everything up snapped. It was one day before Rath Yatra. And this couple had been so impressed by Jayananda and his crew working non-stop. They came down and they were crying. that these boys work so hard. This big tall guy worked so hard, and the thing snapped. Somehow or other, Jayananda, Jimmy, what we say Jugar, in India we say Jugar. By Jugar he fixed it somehow or another. He spent the whole night working on it, and by the morning it was ready to go up and down again. And we've seen the pictures, Jayananda dancing in front of the cart, and Prabhupada sitting there going down 5th Avenue, the street in the world. And we had the Rath Yatra, and they went down to Washington Square Park, and suddenly they had a big festival in the park and nobody saw Jayananda. And they were looking all around because he'd been for 3 days he hadn't had any sleep. And then suddenly somebody looked up inside the cart, way up on top, and a couple of 2x4s. Jayananda, he knew nobody would find him there. So he lay down and stretched out and went to sleep inside the Rath cart. That was Jayananda. And he always made sure his crew had lots of prasadam, especially halava. Anybody who worked on the Rath carts, they worked hard, but they got nice halava and simply wonderfuls, and he always made sure there was plenty of prasadam for his crew. One day prasad was late, and the devotees had been working hard, and they're very upset. So Jayananda said, well, anyway, we don't have anything else. We can eat Jagannath's grease. And he took some of the axle grease, you know axle grease. And Jayananda had so much faith that it's Lord Jagannath's prasad. He ate the axle grease. That was Jayananda. And I can remember Jayananda many times came to Portland. He said, we had the best sweet rice outside of New Vrindavan. He said, New Vrindavan, because they had their own cows. We used to go to a farmer outside the city to get our pure milk. And he said, Portland has got the best sweet rice. He loved to come to Portland. He loved me too much. He was very kind to me. So, and in those days, I had been very famous as a cook. On the East Coast, Narottam was very famous. On the West Coast, I was famous. Even Vishnujan Swami came to our temple with his bus. And one day, after spending one day there, he said, this is the first temple, and I've been to 17 so far, that has nice prasadam. So I knew when I was driving into Portland, Deena Bandhu said, we're going to have nice prasadam. So we drove down from from Portland to San Francisco for Rath Yatra. And Jayananda came and put his big hand on my shoulder. His big hand on my shoulder. He said, Prabhu, I hear you're a good cook. I said, I know something. He said, well look, we have 1 ton of potatoes and 1 ton of cauliflower. And we have to make potatoes, cauliflower and sour cream sabji for tomorrow's Rath Yatra. And they had this special steamer. It was a huge pot like this, but it was it was empty inside, so steam would flow around the empty space inside, a double jacket like that, this huge steamer. And then they had these they were like ovens, but the same thing, it was steam went all around inside, was double jacket. And you could put like 25 kilos of potatoes in one and 25 in the other, and then you have 50 kilos of potatoes cooked, and just cooked like that, and it didn't burn. So he got me. So I never cooked like that in my whole life. 1 ton of potatoes, 1 ton of cauliflower, so many bell peppers and whatever else we had, and tons of sour cream, and it's putting things in the 2 little oven doors and pulling it out into this big steamer and putting in all the spices and stirring it around. By the end of the night, I was cooked. But that was Jayananda. He gets you to do things that was impossible to do. In fact, in New York Rath Yatra, one devotee told me they didn't have the luxury of power tools, and they had all these iron rods that they had to cut into 2-foot lengths. And if anybody else told me to cut them with a hacksaw, I would have told them, get lost. But Jayananda said, we need all this bar, rebar cut to 2-foot lengths. So there that devotee was there, ching, 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 ching. And it was in New York Rath Yatra time that Jayananda found out that he had leukemia. He didn't know what it was. He just saw funny bumps coming on his body. But he kept it hidden. He said, this Rath Yatra is so important. Prabhupada down 5th Avenue. He said, afterwards I'll see what's the problem. He just ignored. That was Jayananda. He ignored this body. His body was meant for Prabhupada's service and nothing else. So, one day Keshav Bharati walked out of his room. It was late at night. Nobody was in the hallway. He saw Jayananda walking down the hallway, bent over like this. And he came out of his room. He said, Jayananda, what's the matter? Oh, nothing's the matter. I'm okay. He said, no, I saw you. You tell me what's the matter. He said, nothing's the matter. He said, Jayananda, you can't fool me. I saw what I saw. So they went in the room. He said, you can't tell anybody until after, you have to promise not to tell anybody till after Rath Yatra. He said, all right, but you have to promise me you'll go to the doctor and see what the problem is. So then he showed him all these funny welts and bumps, black marks all over his body. And Keshav Bharati was freaked out. He never saw such thing in his life. He couldn't imagine this guy was working so hard on Rath Yatra, and some strange disease was racking his body. So finally, after Rath Yatra was over, that glorious New York Rath Yatra, then Keshav Bharati went to Jayananda's room. He said, I kept my end of the bargain. I haven't said anything to anyone. Now you're coming with me to the hospital. So they went to the hospital and they found out his leukemia and there's no cure and he's probably going to die very soon. So they kept him in the hospital and he called Keshav up. He said, I want you to make a whole bunch of Simply Wonderfuls and come to the hospital. So Keshav Bharati thought, well, I guess he wants to have a big feast before he goes. So they got down to the hospital and Keshav Bharati came with all the Simply Wonderfuls and Jayananda he said, get me a knife. And he got a knife and he cut them all in half. He said, why is he cutting them in half? Then he was on a drip, and he just got out of the bed, held on to the drip. He said, come with me. And they went down to the TV room where all the other prisoners were watching TV, And Jayananda turned off the TV and started having a preaching program. And he started a kirtan. He got all these people in the hospital to chant Hare Krishna. And he gave I think he had actually Keshav Bharati speak. He was too weak to speak, but he led the kirtan and then he had Keshav Bharati speak. And Keshav Bharati, here's a guy who just found out he's going to die within a couple of weeks. And the first thing he does is go out and have a preaching program and distributes prasadam. That was Jayananda. And we were talking about Jayananda was a big guy, big, lanky guy, and he was always engaged in service. When Prabhupada would come, everybody would fight to get into the room to be with Prabhupada. But Jayananda was always, taking out the trash or doing some service. And Prabhupada always called, where's Jayananda? So one time all the devotees were sitting, and Prabhupada said, where's Jayananda? They brought Jayananda. Jayananda came walking in, and Prabhupada smiled, like one of those smiles, like 10,000 suns have arisen in the sky at once. He said, Jayananda, he looks just like Lord Chaitanya, so tall and so big, long arms. And all the devotees went, Jai, and Jayananda was totally embarrassed. But that was Jayananda. So finally the Rath Yatra was over, so then he went to LA. And from LA he went to San Francisco to try and, not San Francisco, he went to Mexico because there was some cancer clinics there that weren't allowed to operate in the United, because they were new age type of treatments. But it didn't work, so he came back to LA. Then he decided that LA should have Rath Yatra. And that started the whole thing, because San Francisco was proud that on the West Coast, San Francisco is the only place that no one will come, they were thinking. That everybody goes to everybody's, and Manu arranges a whole bus with all the kids from Alatra, and they go from one Rath Yatra to the next. But they were thinking that no one will come. But somehow or other, Jayananda persevered. And even though he couldn't do anything from his room, he was phoning and getting materials, calling up all his friends, getting donations, getting things donated, consulting with the devotees. They were building this Rath Yatra in the parking lot next to the temple. And somehow he arranged it. Then one day, one devotee came and said, Jayananda, there's a problem. Only you can solve it. You have to come out to the Rath cart. So they got Jayananda in his wheelchair, and they wheeled him out to the parking lot. And whole LA temple was there. Even they had invited his mother and father. And it was Jayananda's birthday. And they made a birthday cake in the form of a Rath Yatra cart. And they knew they couldn't get Jayananda any other way to come unless they tricked him. And Jayananda took one look at that birthday cake and realized what was going on. And suddenly, though he didn't have any strength left, he stood up. He pushed himself up in the wheelchair and began preaching the glories of Rath Yatra and Lord Jagannath and Srila Prabhupada. And finally, and behind him, his parents were there with tears streaming down their faces. Then he sunk back into the chair, his wheelchair. And then he cut up the cake and distributed it to everybody. That was Jayananda. So finally he didn't live to see that Rath Yatra. He left on this day, 1977. All day he was just lying in his bed. They had Prabhupada. Those days we didn't have all these funny things. We had tape recorders, if anybody remembers tape recorders. They had a tape recorder going with the speaker next to Jayananda's ear. And people were always with him chanting, and he was listening to Prabhupada Kirtan. And it was this day before Nrsimha Chaturdasi on 1977. And one brahmachari went into the Didi room. It was Mangalarti time. And nobody had sent him, just somehow he went to the Didi room, and the Pujari room, not the Didi room, the Pujari room. And he got Lord Jagannath's garland. He decided to bring it over to Jayananda. And Jayananda was lying in his bed. The conch shell was blowing. Mangalarti was about to start. He put that garland very lovingly over Jayananda's neck. Jayananda rolled his head toward the speaker to hear Prabhupada, and Jayananda left this world and entered the eternal pastimes of Lord Jagannath. And there's some incredible pastimes even after Jayananda left this world, because there was one girl, she worked Kalindi, she worked in a nursing home taking care of old people. And it was a small one, only about 10 patients they had. So there was one lady, she was always very friendly with her, and because she's friendly with everyone, and so she used to wear tilak to her job and everything. The one lady, she was about to die, and she was taking care of her, and sometimes when cleaning the room she would sing Hare Krishna. So the family would often come to see their mother. And the mother told that this nurse is always chanting Hare Krishna. And she has those things like Jim used to have on his head. So they asked her, "Are you Hare Krishna?" And she said, "Yes." "Then you might know my brother. You guys know him, we know him as Jim, but you all know him as Jayananda." She was taking care of Jayananda's mother. And she was there when Jayananda's mother left this world. So even after his death, he was still giving his mercy. Anyway, so today is a very special day. It's one of our favorite days to remember the wonderful pastimes of Jayananda. There was no one like him. I feel privileged to have had his association. Because of Corona, ordinarily there'd be other Prabhupada disciples here. You want to say something? Where's the microphone? Oh, we don't have it. Huh?
I said you said everything yours to say, but I can just remember whenever you were around.
Wait, look at the microphone so the people in internet land can hear also. Oh, we'll read Prabhupada's letter also.
Deena Bandhu said everything was the same. That's what I had. Whenever the devotees were around Jayananda, they just felt this aura
Yeah.
of peace, bliss and peace and happiness. One time I got on the elevator and he pulled out this carton of sweet rice, big sweet rice, and gave me a bunch of sweet rice to take. And he always had prasad with him.
Yeah.
And he just felt like, wow, it's fantastic. And then one time at the end of the Rati Ashura, everybody was gone. And everybody was supposed to help with the cleanup and everything, but somehow it didn't happen. So they came around and I looked around and Jayananda was there by himself cleaning up the
Kitchen.
cleaning up the grounds.
Grounds, that's
The
right.
grounds of the Rati Ashura. So, all the papers and cups and plates and everything. So I got to help him do that. So that was nice. And then one time he came to our temple in San Diego, and he organized the Shipping Festival, and he did most of the cooking. It was like things that would have taken us like all day long. It seemed like it just happened automatically when he was there. We had a big thing of olives, and somehow we made it in the oven, which nobody saw before. A big thing of running potatoes. Cooked everything in the oven, and it all came out perfectly. And just the few devotees in there, and being in there with Jayananda was like, wow, this is like being in the spiritual world. So, just small things like that, I had chances to see Jayananda do like incredible things. So that's about all I can say right now.
Okay, here's Prabhupada's letter. My dear Jayananda, please accept my blessings. I am feeling very intensely your separation. In 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give me some contribution, 5,000, for printing Bhagavad Gita. After that, you have rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death you will remember Krishna, and as such, you have been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. If not, if you had any tinge of material desire, you have gone to the celestial kingdom to live with the demigods for many thousands of years and enjoy the most opulent life of material existence. From there you can promote yourself to the spiritual world. But even if one fails to promote himself to the spiritual world, at that time he comes down on the surface of the globe and takes birth in a big family like a yogi or Brahmin or aristocratic family, where there is again chance of reviving Krishna consciousness. But as you were hearing Krishna Kirtan, I am sure that you were directly promoted to Krishna Loka. Krishna has done a great favor to you not to continue your diseased body and has given you a suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. Another Prabhupada wrote, Jayananda's death is glorious. It is very good. What is the use of such a useless body? Better to give it up. He has left his body very wonderfully, and he has been transferred to Vaikuntha. I have already sent a condolence letter for publication in Back to Godhead. Everyone should follow the example of Jayananda. I am very proud that I had such a disciple. If possible, Jayananda's picture should be hung on the Rath Yatra cart of Lord Jagannath, and that all our temples may set aside one day holding a festival in his honor, just as we do in the disappearance of other great Vaishnavas. Sri Jayananda Thakur ki! Hare Krishna.
Deena Bandhu Prabhu ki jai.